Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, wherever you may be. Welcome to today's webinar for ICT accessibility. And today's webinar is caring and sharing, creating more accessible social media. And before I turn it over to Lisa, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Just reminders to see the closed captioning, click on the closed captioning button on your screen. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window. And just as far as upcoming events, keep checking back at the AT3center.net events page. And then we'll also be sending out registration links via the AT3 listserv. I do want to mention that our next webinar in the ICT accessibility series will be on April 28th at 2:30 Eastern, and the topic of that webinar will be accessibility for web content authors. And we will be sending out information on each of the next four sessions in the series, and information as far as registering. And the last thing is when you receive the post-webinar survey, please fill that out, and also as part of that, talk about other topics that would be valuable to you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Marty. And thank you for having me here to talk about creating more accessible social media. I am very excited to be presenting on this topic. Although I am actually not a very good social media user myself, ironically, which is funny to me. So to get started, I would like to go ahead and ask you all, what social media platforms does your organization use? So if you would just pop some responses in the chat. I'm just kind of trying to see what you are mainly using. If you use multiple, please put multiple. Right, we got a lot of Facebook and Twitter, Zoom. Ooh. Twitter, Facebook, Zoom, Instagram, Twitter. Got a LinkedIn there. All right, great. Oh, I got a TikTok in there. Interesting. All right. Looks like you guys are using quite the variety, which is what I expected. Oh, there's a Twitch. Twitch is an interesting one. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. Like I said, it's just kind of fun to see which ones people are actually using and kind of keep a pulse on that. So without further ado, let's just jump in. Okay, so when I was titling this, I actually, for some reason, decided to pull up the idea of the sharing is caring that came from Care Bears. I guess I watched that when I was growing up. I don't remember too much about it, but that phrase is, pretty popular these days, and that's where it came from. So I have a picture of the Care Bears here setting off on a fun little adventure. And interestingly enough, that picture is from a reboot. I didn't even realize they were doing a reboot until I went to find a picture of this presentation. So that was kind of funny. So again, the topic title here is Caring is Sharing and Accessibly. So in 2018, a Facebook survey discovered that about 30% of its users had difficulty seeing, hearing, speaking, organizing thoughts, walking, or grasping with their hands. This is a number we see fairly commonly across the different disability numbers that we see. But I thought it was interesting that Facebook actually just, surveyed its own users to see if that ratio kind of was accurate for them as well. And sure enough, it was. So it's quite a large minority of users, really, that do need to have things made accessible for them to be able to access. Just speaking about the screen reader user experience, WebAIM, which is a great group to follow if you're not familiar with them already. It stands for Web Accessibility in Mind. They do a screen reader survey every single year, and we get lots of great data from this. And one of the things that they found was that only about 62.8% of respondents who had beginner proficiency with screen readers actually rate social media sites as very or somewhat accessible. So again, we're seeing more than 30%. This is about 37% of respondents that don't actually rate social media sites as accessible. Some more data to look at. This is from a group called Accessibility Oz. They're over in Australia. and every year they do some testing on social media platforms to actually rate the overall accessibility of these platforms. So this is a really large table, and I won't go through every single one of them, but they tested Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter, and YouTube. And the things that they tested out on those particular platforms were keyboard accessibility, whether or not there was autoplay on the videos, whether or not you could turn off autoplay, videos being able to be paused or stopped, whether they had page titles, headings, forms, ARIA, and HTML, which are some more web-related things that we don't get into or don't need to get into today. So as far as what was presented in this table, we see a lot more fails than we do passes. The majority of them are actually fails. So that doesn't seem really great, and we can kind of see why those numbers that WebAIM received, or sorry, not Facebook, sorry, that WebAIM received, why they're there. And also on the other side of things, so this is more on the base of testing they did was more on the ability to be able to add things to your content to make that content accessible. So kind of shifting more into not necessarily the access of the platform, but how accessible the content can be. And again, they did the same platforms: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter, and YouTube. And in this case, we had a few more passes. So they actually tested also on desktop versus iOS versus Android, which was really good to see, because not all of the platforms do the same thing across their different, see, that's another way, I was going to say platform again, but it sounds really redundant because we're talking about desktop versus mobile here. But anyway, so we do see more passes, and I'll kind of go through and explain the fails as we go through the presentation. Oh, and somebody's saying there's a black box passing. Let me move this over. Thank you for letting me know that. Is the screen clear now? Great. Thank you so much. I had no idea that was showing. Okay, excellent. All right, so when it comes to actually being able to add accessible content, we do have a few more passes than with the platform accessibility itself. And like I said, I'll kind of go through each one of these as we go through some of the specific content topics and talk about which things or which versions of mobile or desktop you can actually use to add these things as we get into the presentation. Okay, so the question though is, with platforms that aren't fully accessible, what can you do? And just some higher level things to keep in mind that you can do to kind of let yourself be a little more available to deal with any potential accessibility concerns. The first one is to create a clear method for getting users in touch with the platform's accessibility team. So most of these platforms, they do actually have a full-on accessibility team somewhere in their organization, and they make it pretty easy for you to get in touch with them. So Facebook actually has a Facebook accessibility page itself, for instance. So you can like them, keep an update on what's kind of going on with things on the Facebook accessibility front. Same thing goes for Twitter and Instagram and so on. The second thing you can do is to make sure you create a clear method for users to contact you. So again, this might be where you can actually put a link or to your website, a phone number. You also may want to put an email address in your about section, kind of on whatever platform it is. And of course, that's different depending upon the platform. But as long as you're kind of keeping a clear line of communication between yourself and your users, you're probably going to be able to catch their frustrations with anything they encounter a little more quickly. And the third thing is just to make sure you post to multiple platforms and locations. So if you have Facebook and Instagram, for instance, you may want to post to both, or if you have multiple more than that, you also may want to put similar content up on your website, and hopefully your website is accessible as well. But anyway, the more places you post, the more likely that somebody is going to be able to get to that information. So just kind of use whatever is at your disposal as much as possible. And that at least should get people the majority of the options they can to access your content, and a method to kind of get in touch with you if they need to kind of say, hey, I'm having a struggle with this or whatever. And then also to let them turn in any potential platform issues to said platform. Okay. All right, so let's move over into the idea of creating the actual accessible content. So the meat of what we're really trying to discuss today. And if any of you have been in any accessibility presentation so far, you'll hear us talk about images and alt text every time. So that's where I'm going to start. All right, so first off, we want to make sure that images are always described. So if there's an image alongside our content, then it needs to be described for those who can actually see that content. Of course, if we have built-in features available, we'll want to use those. But unfortunately, not every single platform has the ability for us to add that at this point in time. Another fun thing about social media and the different platforms is that they typically call this something different depending upon the platform. So for instance, some call it alternative text, which is probably what you've heard us say more often than not. And I may say alt text as well. So either of those are the same thing. And then you have Instagram and Pinterest, which actually call it a text description. So as long as they've got some method for you to be able to attach a description of that text, it doesn't necessarily matter what it's called. It just needs to be there. And if it is there, go ahead and use that one. However, if a method for adding this alternative text is not included in that platform, you just need to make sure and add your description of the image to the post content itself. So that's maybe not the best option, but again, if that's all you've got, that's the best you can do. You're covering your base there. All right, so let's do a little practice around here. So what I've got on the screen right now is actually, this was taken from a post about a meaningful description. This person suggested a couple of options, which we'll go over. So this wasn't me saying this, but we'll get to that when we get there. All right, so this tweet that this person was saying was alongside this image is, "Don't worry, Toronto, it's going to get better soon." And the image that we have here is a 4-day forecast for Toronto that's got the day, the dates, whether or not it's going to be sunny or snowy, a little image to kind of show that weather condition, and then we have the temperatures at the very bottom. Okay, so again, I'm just going to ask you to put some things in the chat. What do you all think that a meaningful description for this particular image alongside that tweet is going to be? Got somebody that says date, weather, and temperature. Okay, got one that says weather forecast for Saturday, January 6th. 4-day weathercast showing forecasted weather for the next 4 days. Next 4 days will be cold and snowy. Okay. All right. Okay, I've got one that says Saturday, January 6th, mainly sunny, -17 Celsius. Sunday, January 7th, a few flurries, negative. So kind of describing the whole thing. That's good. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your participation there. Y'all had some great ideas. All right. So what this person suggested, again, I just kind of stole, or sorry, not suggested. We're going to start with the unhelpful one first. So we often see something like Toronto weather forecast as the description. So unfortunately, that's not really getting us any idea, if we can't see this image, about what the temperature is like, how it's changing, or anything like that. So instead, what we want to do is actually kind of look at the trend potentially. And that's one thing we can actually put in this description box here. So what this person suggested is forecast for Toronto temperatures showing -17 degrees Celsius today, improving to -1 degree Celsius by Tuesday. So again, there isn't really a wrong answer when it comes to describing images necessarily. And of course, that tweet adds some context there. So the context really that we wanted to add to that tweet was, don't worry, Toronto, it's going to get better soon. And the idea is that that trend is going up, right? So that's what this person described. Now, they may have left out the fact that there's going to be a few flurries in the mix, something like that. So it could have been good to add that kind of thing to this description. But again, we're still getting the main gist of it. So we're constantly kind of walking this fine line with alt text, with being descriptive and also being concise so that we're not making it too long. So I think this was a good one, but again, you'll have some great suggestions in there. So again, thanks for playing along. Okay. Another thing that we see happening in the world of alt text for images right now is that there are a lot of platforms that are actually starting to do auto-generated alt text. And same thing for captions when we get to captions here in a little bit. So right now, the auto-generated alt text is available on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And basically what it is they've got some artificial intelligence taking a look at the image as you're adding it, and then trying to figure out what's in that image. And then it'll kind of add a little description for you. So you may guess that there may be some problems with that, and we'll go over an example here shortly. But the good thing is that you actually are able to override that and add your own. So anytime you are using one of these platforms that has this added, just make sure that you're actually checking to see what it says and change it or add to it if you need to. So again, it doesn't always get it completely 100% correct. So I'm saying here, beware of auto-generated text. The image that we have on the screen right now is of a very grumpy cat. It's a cat that's kind of Siamese-ish, has a frown on his face, blue eyes. Okay, so does anybody know who this cat is, though? Wait for you to put in the chat. Grumpy cat, yeah. Awesome. Got a lot of good Grumpy Cat fans out there. Okay, so yeah, this is a popular cat, internet cat, I would say, called Grumpy Cat. He became famous because he constantly looks grumpy. So let me see if I want to ask you guys in the chat. So what do you think, if you're a robot, you know, what would you actually say that the robot is going to say about this image? What do you think? Maybe a cat, yeah. Yeah, great. Okay. Yep, you're all 100% spot on. It's gonna just basically see that it's a cat. So what I actually did, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this a second ago, but aside from social media platforms, a lot of programs like Microsoft Office, so Word or PowerPoint, if you have the newer versions like 2019 or Office 365, they're starting to actually include this auto generation of text as well. So I put this image into my PowerPoint as I was building it and let it build a description for me. And what did it come up with? A cat with a human face. So I thought that was actually really funny, considering it's, you know, just what we're talking about with the robots figuring things out. So I thought that was really great. But anywho, what is missing though is that this is a very important internet figure called Grumpy Cat. So unfortunately, it's just not going to get to that level of detail. And if that context is important for your images, it's just going to miss a few times. Or sorry, not a few times, probably more often than not. And also, I don't know, personally, I'm not really a huge fan of AI, and I don't really want it to get where it's good enough at that. So matter at hand is that it's always best to just check out your auto-generated text and make sure you're not getting Grumpy Cat misdescript. All right, so speaking of the platform support for this particular text alternative, so most of them actually do provide a method to add text alternatives to your images. Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, they're on all of the different platforms in terms of mobile or desktop. You can add those wherever. The only thing I'll note is that Instagram doesn't actually transfer the alt text to Facebook automatically unless they fixed it since I last checked into this. But as far as I know, that doesn't happen right now. So if you're using the feature that transfers Instagram pictures to Facebook, or I'm sorry, Instagram posts to Facebook, just make sure you go and add your alt text into Facebook after that as well. Now, LinkedIn is a little bit weird because it does let you add alt text, but it's only available on desktop. So if you try to do it on your mobile phone, it's not going to work. unless you go to like the browser and you do that in desktop mode. But the mobile apps currently are not letting you add alt text. They're very aware, and I think they're trying to work on that, but it's just not quite done yet. Pinterest has a description field. That's where the alt attribute is added there. And Snapchat, it's not supported, unfortunately. Snapchat and TikTok both are some of the more inaccessible platforms. And TikTok, I have an NA because you can't really add images to TikTok. It's just videos. At the bottom of this slide, and I haven't mentioned yet, but I will be sharing these slides with AT3 and they will be posted to the AT3 website. So don't worry about catching these links or anything like that. You'll have access to that after the presentation. But there is actually a pretty helpful article that I've linked to on this slide that gets you to Accessibility Oz's page on text alternatives and things. So it actually does a pretty good job of getting all of the information about how to access the alt text features in all of these platforms, kind of on one page. Okay. So another thing that is commonly shared on social media is GIFs. Whether or not you pronounce that GIFs or GIFs, I go with GIFs. Doesn't matter. The same thing that we're talking about here. But unfortunately, GIFs are a little bit more challenging than images when it comes to social media. That's because image description isn't as widely available as it is for images. And also platforms don't handle the need for the pause or stop very well. So when we're thinking about web accessibility standards, there is a standard that actually says we need to play or pause or stop on different web elements. And unfortunately, most platforms aren't handling this super well just yet. The other thing is they could just stop after 5 seconds. But again, that's not something the platforms are handling super well. The other thing that's kind of in your control is that you need to make sure and choose GIFs if you are going to share them that aren't flashing a whole bunch, because those could unfortunately cause seizures. So just kind of be careful with which GIFs you're choosing to share. And then also just make sure you kind of check out what the platform is or isn't doing as far as playing and pausing. If you cannot add a form of image description on them, go ahead and put that description in the post content as well. Okay. All right, so videos. Those are a really big deal, no matter if we're talking just websites or social media. And Rob Carr had a great presentation, I think last month. I don't know, time is still weird. But on multimedia and everything, that should be posted to the AT3 website as well, if you'd like to go back and review that one. So I won't hit all of the specifics of this too hard, but in general, videos always need captions. And that's for those who can't hear the video, but it's also for a lot of individuals now who are just scrolling through their feeds and just kind of don't actually watch the video with sound. I think it's about 85% of videos, don't quote me on that, right now, that are being viewed without sound. It's a very large percentage right now. And also there have been a lot of studies recently coming out that say captions actually help learning retention as well. So it's a good idea to have these no matter what. You have two types of captions: open, which are completely burned into the video, and then closed, where they're kind of laying on top of the video and the user has the option to turn them on or off. So especially if you're sharing things on social media, you may really want to consider describing what you're doing. And this is called audio describing or audio description. We have, I have a link there from AMI. They do a really great, all of their stuff is great, but integrated description is kind of one of their focuses. And they're a media company, and they actually write description into their scripts. So as they're doing these programs, it's all being described as they're actually doing it, which eliminates the need for a separate audio description track, which social media platforms typically don't handle super well. I don't think any of them allow for that. So always just kind of consider, if you can, describing what you're doing so that someone who can't see is getting the same benefit from that video as someone who can. Okay. So there's another animal when it comes to live videos. So Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn all have versions where they allow you to go live and present video content. So as far as I know right now, Facebook Live and YouTube Live are the only ones that have live video captioning available. That's where you can either hire a third party and caption. And I think at least YouTube has auto-generated ones, I believe. I'm not sure if Facebook does just yet. but those are the only ones that do. All right. So in terms of caption platform support, so this is not kind of back to away from the live idea and just back to just adding general videos to your feeds. The ones that allow you to upload SRT closed caption files are Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram Live. And both Facebook and Instagram, I'm sorry, I said Instagram Live, I meant Instagram TV or IGTV. So excuse me for that mistake there. But Facebook and Instagram TV also do auto-generated. So again, this isn't going to be the most accurate necessarily, but if it's all you got, then it's an option. The ones that only allow you to do open captions are Instagram, like the stories and the posts, and then Pinterest and Snapchat and TikTok. So those are a little more limited in what they're allowing you to do at this point in time. But as I was preparing for this, I just found an article that actually said Instagram is testing support for auto captions of stories. So this could be something that's fantastic for those of you who do stories, because right now, what I know is stories kind of have to be taken down and run through a tool and then reposted. So this could actually be a really great thing. So also, since Facebook and Instagram are the same company, I imagine that anything that comes to Instagram is probably going to end up in Facebook as well. Okay. Before I'm actually going to pause for questions here shortly, but before we do that, I'll close out this section on videos. So some tools that you can actually use to burn in captions and whatnot to videos that need to be posted to Instagram or other some of those other options, I guess really any of them. Capwing is one that's a desktop app that we just recently learned about, and it allows you to do, it's kind of got an auto-generated thing as well, and allows you to kind of create burned in ones or download the file as well. And then a lot of people are apparently using Threads by Instagram, which was kind of intended as a small group sort of thing for Instagram, but it allows kind of auto-generated captioning, and then you can kind of push it back over to Instagram. And then another one we've heard about pretty regularly is Clip-O-Matic, but unfortunately it's an iOS only app. So if you don't have an Apple phone, you won't be able to use this one. Okay, so I'll pause here for questions. And I think there are several in the Q&A, so let me go there. All right, so how do you balance accessibility and accessible alternative text? That's a really good question. Typically, the rules are kind of the same as what I described when I was going through that section. Just make sure that you're actually, describing something like you would to someone over the phone. So just make sure that the context is there for your image. Then, let's see here. Are social media platforms working on accessibility for naming links? Right now, you cannot name link in any Facebook that is from another outside source. That's a great question. And I was actually thinking through that as I was preparing for this presentation, because I kept seeing things about descriptive link text, and I don't know any that do that. So my answer is I don't know. I know LinkedIn shortens links, but I don't know. That's not something that any are handling super well right now, and I'm not really sure why. But turn in the ticket, maybe that'll change if enough people talk about it. Okay. Oh, good question. If an image is for decorative purposes only and doesn't contribute to the text content, do you still recommend adding alt text? Yes, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. I meant to go over that when I was in that section. Because there is no way for you to mark something as null like you can in an HTML sort of situation, or with Word, if you can mark as decorative. Because there's no way to do that, I would still recommend putting alt text on anything that comes through social media, even if it is decorative, yes. is there a preference from an accessibility standpoint for open or closed captions? I don't have necessarily proof of this, but I feel like open captions are not better than closed captions because there really is no option to toggle them on and off. So I would say closed captions are still the preference if you have the option. But if all you can do is open captions, then of course you want to do open captions. And then I've got one for, can you add alt text after it's been posted? Yes, you typically can go back and add alt text after the images have been added. So I think you just have to kind of go back and edit the post typically. But again, that's maybe going to be platform dependent. So I can't answer for all platforms. I just know Facebook, Instagram, they typically will let you go in and edit that, yes. Okay. All right. I'll try to go back and answer some more questions later, just to make sure I stay on track with time. But we'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so I wanted to kind of touch on just writing good post content as well. So kind of run through these kind of quickly. But the first thing you can do is kind of avoid putting text and images. So there are a lot of reasons why we don't want to do this. Of course, you can put a text description or alt text on there. But if you're thinking about somebody who's maybe got low vision and is zooming in really large on their screen, that may make it really difficult for them to read what's in the image. So we typically just try to avoid putting text and images where possible. Also try to use sans serif fonts. In the cases of most platforms, they don't really give you a lot of flexibility, kind of just like with the descriptive links. You're kind of stuck with what they give you. So there's not a lot of flexibility here, but any platforms that do let you change fonts, just try to stick with those sans serif fonts just for readability. Another readability thing is to avoid heavy capitalization or italic usage. It just makes it a little more difficult to actually just discern the different words and things from each other. So you might have some people who have trouble reading those things. Another small thing you can do is actually indicate what the link goes to. So by just putting out in the brackets, whether it's an audio or a pic or a video or something like that, just so somebody might know what to expect before they hit the link, especially again, given that you cannot add descriptive link text to many of these posts. You also could try to use shortened URLs. So this could go a little ways to helping that descriptive link text not being available. So you can actually kind of go to bit.ly.com or tinyurl.com and then edit the link, and it can be a little more descriptive just at the end of that URL. Those are pretty commonly used across the web these days. And another thing is just to avoid or make sure you explain acronyms if you use them. But that's just kind of a standard writing post. It's not necessarily super specific to social media, but there you go. All right, so let's talk about emojis for a second. Now, everyone loves emojis. They're fun and they can really spice up your posts. But unfortunately, you might want to think about using emojis or emoticons pretty sparingly. So, you know, what we see on the screen here is a smiling face kind of with winky eyes and a tongue out. So if we think about what a screen reader might read this out as, it's actually going to be face with closed eyes and stuck out tongue. So that's a lot of text for this one little thing. Now, I actually have a video that I'd like to show you. So let me switch over it real quick. And I'll play this real quick and then we'll talk about what we heard.
Clapping hand sign y'all graphic clickable emoji colon. Clapping hand sign don't graphic clickable emoji colon. Clapping hand sign quick graphic clickable emoji colon. Graphic clickable clapping hand sign deleting graphic clickable emoji colon. Clapping hand sign yeah graphic clickable emoji colon. Clapping hand sign tweets graphic clickable emoji colon. Graphic clickable clapping hand sign after graphic clickable emoji colon. Clapping hand sign I graphic clickable emoji colon.
Okay. I didn't play the whole video there, but I think that you can kind of get the point here. This is a post, and this is a really great accessibility expert here. His name is Adrian Roselli, and he has a whole post on emojis, or not a post, sorry, an article that I actually got that from, and it's really handy to refer back to. But what was happening there is it was a, one of those posts where they have a word and then a clapping hand sign and then a word and then a clapping hand sign and so on and so forth. So it just read out really long and it was just one sentence basically. So, I mean, I didn't want to keep listening to it. So that's just something to kind of consider as you're adding emojis. Just try to use them sparingly and don't just, click multiples of them if you can avoid it. Because it's really going to impact users who are, hearing that content in whatever fashion via assistive technology that they are. Hashtags are also another thing that is used pretty commonly across social media, and we want to make sure, if we can, and place them at the end of the post, just so that the post content is actually what's reached first. And then also a small little thing we can do is to use what we call camel case. So again, if you think of the humps of a camel, that's kind of how your sentence is going to look, because you're going to capitalize each of the each of the words in your hashtag. So I have an example for you to see. One is just all caps, and then one is the camel case. And unfortunately, this font is a little bit difficult to read, as I'm saying that as I'm realizing this now. But you can see a little bit more differentiation between the letters with that camel case versus in all caps. So this is kind of going back to that all caps, use it sparingly as well kind of idea we talked about just a minute ago. But that's another small thing you can do that actually kind of has a big impact on readability. All right, so let's talk about color for just a second. So just like with anything you're posting to the web, we need to make sure we have good color contrast and also that we're using color properly. So this goes for captions. They need to have a good contrast with the background of the video, especially those open captions. And then text on images should also have good contrast with the background. So I know I told you not to use them, but if you do, make sure it has good contrast. The ratio that we're looking for is 4.5 to 1. And I've included a tool here that's they've just added another letter to their name. They used to be the Paciello group, but now they're TPGI. And it's a great tool that's got a little eyedropper. And you can basically just pick two colors and compare them, and it'll show you how close to that ratio that you get. So that's a really great tool to have in your toolbox. And the other thing is to make sure you're using color, or I'm sorry, you're not using color alone to convey any information. And a couple examples of this is first of contrast. So I'm not trying to throw Teen Vogue under the bus here, but I found this post and it's got a kind of light beige-ish background. And the pictures are really pretty. It's got various women of color kind of dancing around it. It's really nice. And then some pink text that says a person's value is not dictated by their color or size. A person's weight is never an excuse for violence. Charlotte Zoller. But it's a pink text, like I said, on this kind of beige background. So it's really difficult to see, especially if you're thinking about scrolling on a tiny screen on a phone, maybe in bright sunlight, especially. This is going to be difficult to see. So they would have made this a little bit darker text, would have been a lot more impactful as a post. And then when thinking about not using color alone to convey information, again, I'm not trying to throw NPR under the bus, but we've seen this a lot with stuff coming out about coronavirus and vaccines and everything like that. And this is actually a graph of kind of what would have happened with the different levels of vaccination. But they're only using color to show where these things, or how this might spread, how coronavirus spreads. So red is infections and gray is vaccinations. Teal is immune from prior exposure, and like light gray is healthy. So if you think about anybody who's colorblind, not being able to differentiate these colors, they're really not going to know which little hexagons correspond to which thing at all. Same thing goes for people who may be at this point turning off color on their phone and just going to grayscale, just to kind of take away the cognitive load that we experience all day, every day. They wouldn't actually be able to know what this graph is trying to say either. So this is something that's really difficult actually, but if you're sharing anything like this, just kind of take that in mind and make sure you're actually adding something in addition to that color to get that point across. Okay. So I'm kind of to the end of the presentation. I did want to leave some time for questions, and I'm really glad that I did because we have a lot of questions. But before I get there, I wanted to point out that we have kind of collected some social media accessibility resources in addition to the ones that I've kind of scattered throughout this presentation on our website. So when you get this slide, you'll have that access to that, and you can see the different things that we're sharing in terms of social media accessibility. Okay. Okay, so let me go over and answer some more questions. And this chat has been rolling right along, so I think I might have to go back and see what questions are in there, but I'm going to start with the Q&A. And Marty or Dave, if you don't mind, if there are any good questions that you've noticed in the chat that you've kind of written down, feel free to hop in and let me know about those, because otherwise it might take me a second to get those
One question, I don't think you got to this one, just asking about whether there's an option for captions to change size.
Oh, that's probably going to depend on the platform. So if you're making a video with open captions using some of those tools that we talked about, that's probably going to allow you to change the size here or there. But I think that, like on YouTube, I know it's pretty standard. If you turn on closed captions, it's just kind of the size that they are. So it's again going to be kind of platform specific. So I don't have a great answer for you there. Oh, and Genesis is saying YouTube does allow you to change sizing within settings. Thank you. Sometimes I get these things wrong, so I appreciate the correction there. Awesome.
One question, does Hootsuite reliably post alternative text?
You know, I don't know too much about Hootsuite. I will be happy to look into it, but at this point, I don't know the answer to whether or not it would reliably post alt text, unfortunately.
And then just if you had any suggestions for making links more accessible on social media, since you can't name the links.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of reiterate what I've kind of mentioned a couple times just as a direct response to that question. But I would say those URL shorteners, so bit.ly or tinyurl, are really good options for that, just because they'll at least make or give you an option to kind of add a little description in the end of that URL.
And then with regarding the Hootsuite question, Eileen says, I use Hootsuite all the time. It does post alt text to Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
That's good. That's good to know. Thank you, Eileen. Okay, I've got some more. Trying to clear these out so I know which ones I've answered, which ones I haven't. Oh, so Tori is asking basically if there's a tool to check if social media posts are accessible. Not that I'm aware of. You suggest using NVDA to check the post, so I would say that's probably going to be your best bet. I don't know of any tools at this point in time that allow you to check. I'm sure someone's going to create one eventually, but I don't know of any right now. Does anyone have any new questions that have come up? Oh, and I see someone commenting WebAIM has a good contrast checker as well. Yes. The reason I like talking about the Paciello Group's contrast checker over WebAIM's in this particular context is that it just makes it a little bit easier for you if you're not familiar with hex codes or getting the hex code off of a color. Then, you know, because you can actually just take the dropper. I would actually try to show you a demo of that tool, but unfortunately, the last few times I've tried to use it with Zoom, it just crashes Zoom, so I don't want to do that to you. But yeah, WebAIM's, you do kind of have to get the color code off of the text and then paste it into the checker. But yes, it's a fantastic tool, and it has a lot of other features too to kind of let you figure out what good colors could go together. Eileen's sharing a video on social media posts and using Hootsuite. That's awesome. Yeah, Genesis, you said you use a software that sends up a red flag if there's too much text in a post. What is that software? Oh, Loomly. Okay. Very neat. I will write this down. I love doing these kind of sessions because y'all all have great ideas. All right, we have another question that came into the Q&A. What are your thoughts on adding image description to the post itself in addition to or opposed to alt text, especially if alt text is not an option? So I would say I've seen this a lot on Instagram actually, where someone actually did add alt text and then they did add that same alt text in the description. And I would say that's redundant. So if you're using a platform that is actually allowing you to add alt text, probably doesn't need to go in the description. So instead of adding both, just kind of save your users the redundancy that would cause. Good question. Oh, I see one I did not. Does Facebook auto strip the description from Insta, and does it do that with all media? Oh, you know, I think the description stays. I would have to test this again to know for sure. Like I said, I'm not a super avid user of this stuff myself, but I think this description stays. It just strips the alt text. That's a good question. And yes, this recording will be shared with y'all after the presentation alongside the slides. So any of the links that I've added to you, added in the presentation will be available to you as well. All right, well, I suppose unless I'm happy to stick on because I finished a little bit early today. But if y'all have any more questions, I'm more than happy to stick around. And if not, let me advance my slides here. Thank you. And if you have more questions after this presentation, you can always contact me at lissa.prince@okstate.edu, and I will post that in the chat for anyone who wants it.
And I will mention again that the next ICT webinar in the series that Oklahoma Able Tech will be presenting will be on April 28th at 2:30 Eastern, and the topic will be accessibility for web content authors. And we'll also provide the description to the next 4 webinars in the series for everybody and send that out to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Marty. Appreciate that.
But with that, we'll just go ahead and stay on just for a minute, just to make sure there aren't any other questions. But thank you, everybody, and thank you so much for the presentation. And thanks, everybody, for the comments and the great questions and your participation. Yes. So everybody have a great day.
We do have one more question coming in. Do you have suggestions for people who use AT like Zoomtext or Android Talkback while posting to social media? Oh, I think what I would do, and that this is kind of true for every platform, they have a lot of information available on their own websites about how accessible they are for people who are actually using assistive technology to post. And if you remember back to that first table I presented, there, a lot of the platforms do have a lot of problems when it comes to actually having them be accessible in order, or for someone who's posting, I'm sorry. So I would suggest kind of going to the platform itself and kind of searching about their accessibility of their platform itself rather than adding accessible content. And we have some of those links kind of in our Able Tech resources as well that go directly to those kind of sites. So I would just suggest starting there, unfortunately, because they're all going to be a little bit different. And whether or not they'll actually work really well with somebody who's using Zoomtext or Android Talkback. Yeah, I feel like I give that answer a lot. It's kind of like an it depends, but typically they'll have the best information, the platforms themselves. Sure. Oh, that's funny, on both sides of the fence. Yeah, get that. That probably makes it really interesting for you for sure. A couple people still hanging out. If you got some more questions, feel free.
I saw that. I thought I'd wait just in case.
Sure. I'm surprised. I was going to say at the beginning, I have 2 cats and a dog, and they haven't made a peep. But normally, as soon as I start talking, they're in here. So y'all did not get to see my cats or dog today, which is kind of sad. Probably better for me. They're pretty good distractions.